Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Travel Coach Network podcast. It is I, Sahara Rose DeVore, the founder and CEO of the Travel Coach Network and the creator and instructor of the Travel Coach Certification Program. Today, we have a guest that's coming from behind the scenes to in front of the camera. We have our very own TCN Podcast manager, Brittany Roberts. Brittany, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
This is so fun. I'm excited.
Well, Brittany is also the founder of Travel Pro Media, where she helps travel professionals launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts. As the host of the Travel Pro audio show, Brittany shares expert insights on podcasting strategies tailored for travel creators, bloggers, coaches, and tour operators just like yourself. With a passion for storytelling and digital media, she is dedicated to helping travel professionals amplify their message, build communities online, and grow their businesses by connecting with one client at a time. Brittany, thanks so much for joining us. I can't wait to dive deeper into the world of podcasting. That's a question and a theme that many of our travel coaches are super interested in. So thanks for being here.
I'm excited to be here and I'm excited to chat all about this nerdy stuff because usually I don't have anyone to talk about but myself. So exciting.
But before we dive into all of that, can you tell us more about yourself and how you got into the travel industry, where your passion for travel stemmed from?
Yeah, I have actually not been internationally traveling long compared to some of y'all. I had my first international trip in 2016, and it was that impactful because I remember it so well. And it was also a very interesting time. So I had been working in a recreation job. I went to school for parks, recreation, and tourism management. So I'm probably one of the few people actually doing stuff I studied. And I was working at a community center, probably 80 to 100 hours a week, and was not happy with the workload, but I loved the work. So I was just doing it until something else came about, really. And then my sister said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Norway?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" She sent me all these photos. This was really at the start of social media before it was as big as it is now. And she said, "I booked my flight, book your flight, we're going." And I was like, "What? I can't just ask for that. Like I have to ask for time off." And she's like, "It'll be fine. Like you can just get another job if you need to." And I was like, "What? That is just like another way of thinking, right?" So I remember putting in my email request and being like, "Okay, I'm gonna put in my international trip." And I was just so scared. Like I remember being sweating, like sweating bullets when I was putting that in. And it was okay. And I was like, "Whoa." I could have asked for time off like way sooner than that. So we had taken 3 weeks. We were traveling through Norway, Denmark. We had not planned anything in advance because we didn't know what we were doing and we were young. And I just remember thinking, this is amazing. I feel so alive because so much of my life had been planned. Even when I was in my 20s doing seasonal jobs and things, I always knew where I was going to be in advance, right? Like 6 months to 2 years in advance. So that was the first time where we really just were winging it. We had so many travel magic moments happen, which we can talk about. And I remember us looking at each other and saying, this is what we're meant to do. This should be the majority of our life, and work should support that. We shouldn't just be working, working, working to support moments where we actually feel alive. So it's funny how each of us in our own way have kind of come around to that full circle, but that was what started it. A couple months later, my grandmother, who raised me, had passed away. So I had this epic high and this epic low, like within 2 months of each other. And it made me reevaluate everything. Like, do I want to continue working in recreation and travel this way? Or do I want travel and recreation to be things I just do like for fun? So I was like, okay, well, I definitely need more time off. I can't be working 80 to 100 hours a week anymore. So I became a teacher, moved to the reservation, which is like a whole book in itself, and started a community for other teachers who like to travel. So that's how I went from being like officially in recreation to then becoming like a travel blogger and a live streamer. I shared all kinds of information with them, things I would find, trips I would find. And I loved it so much that I eventually did all this stuff full time. So now when I'm not doing podcast management and blogging and things like that, client work, I'm hosting trips and creating resources for teachers, which I really love. So that's how that all started. So it's funny that it's like, how did you start your business and like how you came to love travel kind of are the same question, like the answer to the same different questions because they happened at the same time for me.
Yeah, I think you are the epitome of creating a life and lifestyle out of that's ideal to you out of your interests and passions. Because I hear, you do wear many hats and you do a variety of things, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? If you're getting up every day, and this is what I tell members in our program all the time, like create a business that you are excited to get up and work on and work in every single day. And success will come along. And I think you're doing exactly that. So we're so happy that you are, on the TCN team as well, amongst all the other things that you're doing. Let's get into some of the podcasting. What transitioned you from, you mentioned you became a teacher and then you do some group trips, but like why podcasting out of all of the other types of like content creation and things in the digital world? Like why? Because honestly, the only reason there is a TCN podcast is because of you. Because I remember you telling me a couple of years ago, hey, you should consider doing a podcast. And I'm like, a podcast? I don't have the time for a podcast. Like, and you're like, I can help you with that. And I'm so glad that we are, and we'll share like some of the benefits and stuff of having a podcast. But where'd your love for podcasting come into play?
Okay, so before I studied Parks and Recreation Management, and I think I've told you little bits and pieces of this, but I never actually talked to you about it. I was a classically trained singer. So I did all this recording artist work. I actually spent like hours and hours in the recording studio at my college and had so much fun, like nerding out behind the scenes. And I actually, before podcasting was really a thing, I was doing digital audio management for like other singers, right? So it's funny. And I was just doing it for fun at that point because they would get to that class. That was part of like what all of us were doing when we were doing our music classes, because I did that for community college. And they would get to that point and they're like, oh, I hate this part. This is so techy and not fun. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this part. Like, let me help you. And so I was like co-producing for other singers and doing my own stuff. So it's funny, even before podcasting was a thing, I loved that. When I got to university and switched to tourism, I was actually still on a radio show. So I've always been a big fan of independent media, and partially because what you just said about the freedom, like you can make it and say whatever you want. Whereas if you want to get in traditional media, sometimes it's really hard and it takes a really long time. But if you're willing to just work hard, and learn the skills or work with someone who does, you can have a podcast launched in like a weekend, which is amazing, right? And you can say whatever you want. You can speak as long as you want. So it was partially the independent media piece, partially the love of music and singing and all that world that I was in. It feels like honestly a different lifetime now, which is so strange to say. But that's how I first became into like interested in media and then podcasting specifically. So remember I said that I was making resources for teachers who travel, right? Because I was a teacher myself. I was kind of just sharing what I liked. I had thought about doing all these different social media platforms. It was honestly very overwhelming to me at the time when I was still full-time teaching. Like there was just no way I could have kept up with, I mean, there's literally a new platform like every year, it seems. And I was like, I can't keep up with all this. And what's also hard for me is I want to dive deeper into certain things. Like if you only have like 90 seconds or like a couple of slides, like it's so hard to capture people. And I'm not anti-social media, by the way. I always want to say that. I love social media now. But at first, I just didn't think it was going to be really possible for me to build an audience doing short snippets at a time. And I also really love one-to-one connection. So I don't know if I'll ever have like a huge audience of hundreds of thousands of people, maybe sometime in the future, but I also don't think you need that based on my experience to be able to make a full-time income for yourself. I love that podcasting makes people connect to you. They know your voice. That's actually a really weird thing is I'll meet people and they're like, oh, like I know you. I feel like I know you already. So that's been really fun. And then also podcasting is great because then you get to meet people too, right? So if there's ever been someone that you've wanted to maybe talk to and otherwise you don't have something to offer them leverage wise, but it's like, hey, I can invite you on my show, and I learn from people and I've seen clients do that. So there's so many reasons to love podcasting, but that's how it started, was audio production, nerding out over it, and then over time realizing I can apply those skills with podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, some of my favorite things about podcasting when it comes to my business is that it's an opportunity, a couple things. It's an opportunity for me to, like you just said, learn from someone else. So I'll invite people on because I'm like we had I was telling you I had a guest this morning that I interviewed on our podcast, Mr. Scott Eddy, who is massive in the online space in the digital marketing world when it comes to tourism and hospitality and content creation and everything. And yes, I brought him in so that I could pick his brain for all of my listeners and the travel coaches, but also for myself. Like I remember I went away with notes and like I'm like, okay, I'm going to be doing more of this after talking to him. So that's such a benefit. Can you talk about some of the other benefits for travel coaches and travel business owners to have a podcast? You talked about, it's obviously something to offer someone. There's the connection. They get to learn more about you and kind of really personalize your business and your brand. But like, what are some other ways that it can benefit our listeners?
Yeah, so from a practical standpoint, you've probably heard of SEO before, search engine optimization. People usually use that in terms of blogging, which I also love blogging, right? But the cool thing about a podcast is, especially with all the apps now, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about like the trends coming up and kind of where podcasting is going as a medium, but it is so easy to get discovered with a podcast. Whether you put it on YouTube and you also leverage YouTube search, because YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world after Google, so that's huge. But you also have search on the platforms. So if someone is a podcaster, they're more likely to listen to your podcast, right? Like, or if they're a podcast listener, sorry. So if they go on Spotify and say, like, I can't even think of another show, of course, off the top of my head. I should have written some of those down. But say they're listening to another show that has the same audience as Sahara, they're likely to find Sahara's show because just the algorithms will figure out, just like with any other medium, oh, you like this, you'll probably like this. So I've seen, actually, because I'm such a data nerd as well, like people kind of take that journey of like, oh, this person discovered you there. And then I see that, like, okay, now we're getting more people in the Facebook group. So you can kind of see their journey. So strategically, it's a way to get discovered. I already mentioned that you don't have to have the 90-minute or 90-second clip limit. Like, you don't have to limit yourself in the length of speaking. So if you want to do a deep dive in a topic, especially if you have expertise that you want to showcase, right? Like, you're not limited to that, and that can really help. And then also, depending on what your business model is, I know everybody has a slightly different one, but say you want to work with brands or you want to get into the media, you're also building a content library that people can go and binge, right? So that is huge. That if you have like, even if you have like 30 episodes, which sounds like a lot when you're starting out, but it's not in the grand scheme of thing, right? Say you just record 30 and you're like, I'm going to take a break and then see, which you can totally do, by the way. You have maybe 30 hours of content someone can go through and either become like, I definitely want to work with you if you're working with clients, or you have a course, they definitely want to take it because they know you know your stuff. A media person wants to interview you now. A brand wants to work with you because they see your work as quality. I just think that you can't build that loyalty as easily with, say, TikTok videos or Instagram reels, right? Because of the way that people consume them. It's like flick, flick, flick. I'm here for fun. I'm not really searching for anything. And then the fact that I think podcast listeners are just so loyal, right? Like, you can get a TikTok. I mean, even if you have a long TikTok video, maybe 3 minutes for retention, maybe 10 if you do the long ones, but you have to get to a certain point, all these different milestones and hoops you have to join, right? But with a podcast, you can just decide, no, it takes me 20 minutes to dive into this. So it's going to be 20 minutes long, and you can just do that. So I think that's a major pro to podcasting. And then also the intimacy, right? Like, when you hear someone's voice, and especially if you see their face, you get the inflections, the feeling, the emotion. You get so much more of that connection than you get in like a Twitter post. Not that those can't be valuable, but it's just different, right? It's different to feel like you really know somebody. So, so many benefits.
We're gonna cut this part out here, but you keep like skipping, and so I just want to make sure. So I'm not sure if that's gonna catch. So I was changing rooms to see if it would switch.
Okay, that's no problem. I can always like re-record or that part. So did you want me to just do a quick summary again of like the benefits of podcasting?
No, like I we got the most of it. Does it ever like show, like do you think it will not show in the recording? Or does
I
it
think
always, if there's a lag, that it
if
pops
there's a
up?
lag, sometimes like I'll just like like if it's just a space, I'll just delete the space, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Mhm.
But I can also go through and like take apart if it's the audio is really bad, I'll just cut it out. No big deal there. But It looks like it was good on my end, unless my internet's not good. But I'll also turn off my Wi-Fi on my phone
I,
just in case it's internet.
I couldn't tell if it was you or me because it was saying Wi-Fi unstable, but I always record here, so I think it'd be fine. So no, those are all good. So we'll let me see what we can pick up on.
Hey,
Okay.
the good thing is it's just me, so if it's always bad, I can always like re-record and then put it in. So it's not
Yeah,
a big
no,
deal.
I know. That's why I didn't want to say that much. And I was like, well, maybe we'll see because it might sometimes like it has done that. And then I go back and watch and it didn't pick up on it. And I'm like, okay, that's weird, but that's good. So I think we can make it work. Okay. We're going to keep on going here and I'm going to ask. Yeah. Yeah, all of those, I completely agree with all of that. Uh, podcasting is also a way to build your credibility and you're having a sense of authority, right? Like you have a topic that you're talking about. So when our travel coaches have podcasts or travel experts have podcasts, there's people are coming to you for a specific reason. So you have to figure out like what do you want to be known for, what is your messaging all about, and that is something that we talk about to our members is you have to figure out like what is your core message, like who is your audience, and that's something for people who are interested in podcasting to consider. Can you share some other things that for those who are thinking about starting a podcast or maybe are in the very very beginning stages of starting a podcast, what are some things for them to ask themselves and figure out before they, hit launch?
Yes, really good questions. The core message is probably one of the most important, but I know that can also create a lot of pressure because then you're like, well, what if I don't know my core message yet? The fun thing about that is recording, even if you don't publish those first few episodes, I kind of call them the pancake episodes, right? Like just record and start riffing a little bit can be really helpful to see what you believe because sometimes you just need the sounding board to start saying what you think and feel and believe. And then from that, you'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I felt so strongly about that. Like I was getting kind of heated as I was saying that. So that's one thing that really helps with podcasting is again, you have that feeling and the passion that you can hear that you often miss from a text post. So that's one thing you can do is just start recording. Another thing you also want to know is the person who you want to listen to your podcast. That's really important. So even if you're not 100% sure yet, it's good to have an idea. So is it going to be like for mine when I started with teachers, right? I know teachers really well because I taught for 5 years and also I work with them in my other jobs before. So I understood their challenges. I even know when they're off, right? So even when I'm recording or even with social media, like I know when to post, I know when they're online. So it's little things like that. Like really knowing your audience, I think is like the biggest thing because that's gonna create empathy for their pain points and their problems, which I know you talk about so often and also your business model to an extent. Again, like these things are obviously going to grow and evolve over time, but it is helpful to know like, okay, what offers are you going to draw traffic to, right? Like if you are going to have them be like a one-on-one client, that's slightly different than if you're selling a membership where you need a lot of people volume wise or digital products where it's you have to sell like 1,000 a month. So I think having your business model figured out at least a little bit or at first is really helpful. If you absolutely don't know that though, that's okay. You can still grow an audience. I think it's better for you to like put out 30 episodes eventually, even if you're going to go back and like, make it fancier the next time than to not do it at all. So I think there's just a part of a commitment there. I know some people tend to overthink things. I tend to be the like, act first, think later, which is not always beneficial for everything. But for content, it's great because sometimes you just have to put stuff out there and then learn from that, listening to yourself, going back, saying, oh, okay, I didn't like that. I'm going to record that again. That's all part of the process. And you will become a better communicator by actually recording the episodes and figuring out what you feel and believe and also how people respond to what you say. So if you I don't know if you get some kind of review or something or someone messages you and says, "Can you explain more about this?" That's usually a good sign of like, oh, okay, how do you feel about that question? What was your response to that? Did you want to dive deeper onto a topic? So I think the best way is just to start is the first thing. But if you know your audience, if you know your business model, and if you know your core message, that really, really helps. Just that way you're not having to go back and do other work later.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you kind of touched on this a little bit here, but when it comes to having a successful podcast, which can mean so many different things, right? But what are some key elements that can make a podcast engaging and valuable to listeners that our listeners can, put into action and consider for their own podcast?
Yeah. So value means something different to every single person, right? I listen to some podcasts because they're entertaining, not necessarily because I'm, looking for expertise on a certain thing. It just makes me laugh. So if that's their aim, that's successful, right? And I think again, that kind of comes back to business model because like usually entertainment podcasts, they're looking to amass a huge audience and monetize with brand deals or get into a podcast network and get ad reads and things like that. So that's why I said knowing your business model is helpful because then it also lets you know what your approach is. If you are trying to get clients, one really easy thing you can do is just answer frequently asked questions. That is a really low tech way. That way, you don't even have to do heavy SEO. It's just maybe something you see people struggling with, and you can phrase that as a question that you answer. That is something so valuable because the tech, even though there are certain things that I would say, like I believe you have to have, and I know we'll get to that too, like a decent mic and have good audio, right? But it's like if you just have some questions answered, that is going to be so helpful because you think about how many YouTube videos you've gone on, they take 20 minutes to get to the point and you're like, when are they actually going to answer the question? So you just even being direct, your style of recording could be it. It could be your personality. Right. Because I know that one question someone has is like, well, there's already podcast in that topic. Like, what can I add to the conversation? So it could be your personality. It could be your take on something, right? Like maybe you have a certain framework or a certain way you do something that is different than what the standing opinion is. Maybe you just have a hot take. I know Sahara has lots of hot takes, which I love. Like every time I say title, I'm like, ooh, it's going to be a good one. So if you have like hot takes on things in the industry you're in, if you have a differing opinion from the norm, that's a great thing to start with. Answering frequently asked questions, or even just sharing what you feel about something. Like it doesn't always have to be hard, I guess, knowledge to be engaging. It can just be like you sharing your love for a place. Like I listen to some like travel podcasts that are very immersive and they actually get audio clips. Like they'll be hiking and you can hear the leaves crunching under their feet, things like that. It's more of like storytelling. So I think knowing the format, knowing the audience, knowing what engages your person and also what their goal is, because there are some podcasts I listen to where I don't really care if they're like entertaining, right? Because I'm like, I'm just learning about like YouTube from this person. So it's all kind of connected, like your audience, your business model, and also feasibly what you can do. Like, I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to have a field mic and I have to learn like field recording. Absolutely not, if that's not what you're going for. But I think knowing what your podcast purpose is and then what you're hoping to gain from it and what success looks like for you, right? Because you also mentioned success looks different. Do you want to work with brands? Do you want to have millions of downloads? That could be a goal, but you could also just say, if I could have like, 5 clients a month from this podcast, that would be great. And then you maybe need a couple hundred or a couple thousand listeners. So I hope that wasn't too rambly, but it is all connected.
No, I love that you're leading into what I was going to talk about next, which is, well, one misconception that many people have is that, oh, I'll get a podcast and I'll make a lot of money. Like podcast is a way for me to, make a ton of money, which can be true and is true for some people, but that can be quite difficult. But with that said, podcasts can be a really great revenue stream in ways that you haven't thought of. So you've touched on a couple of these. Like if you have an offer, you can kind of mention the offer in there. You can talk about your membership club, or you have something that you're going to be launching soon. You have a book, maybe you can talk about your book. There's different ways, like with some sort of offer. But what are some other ways that people who have a podcast could create new revenue streams for themselves, or at least use their podcast for generation?
Yes, lead generation is so, so, so important. I really wish I would have personally realized that when I first started, right? That's always how it goes. But the nice thing is, you are cutting down on your time by listening to Sahara's podcast, right? It's like, oh my gosh, if I'd had her podcast when I was first starting my own stuff. So, as far as generating leads, And just to clarify for anyone who's like new to that language, a lead just means someone who's interested in your products or services, right? So when we're generating leads, we're kind of gathering the audience. And I will say this is what I did for my teachers is I gathered the community first before I really know how I was going to monetize. And that's totally fine, by the way. If you're really brand new and you're like, I don't know yet, there's too many options and I can't make a decision, then just focus on the person, because that is going to be what takes you all the way anyway, is like serving someone really well and that person, knowing them really well and anticipating their needs, because that will also give you offer ideas. So as far as generating leads, that could be one of the things is like, what do people need? And like, is there something you can create that helps them solve a problem very quickly? I'll give an example. I have this database of different grants, scholarships, and opportunities for teachers for travel. And that's very, very niche and specific. Like, you're not going to be interested in that unless you're a teacher and you like going to those kinds of things. So I have that. And then I could say, if you want my directory, it's totally free. By the way, I'm saying this is a podcast episode. Like, thank you so much for listening. If you want to learn more about this grant, I actually have all of the contact information in this massive directory of over X amount of grants. You can get that in the podcast description. Just go to your app, click on the link, and get it there. So they get that. I get their email address, and then I can send them automated sales sequences or just let them know of frequent things coming up. So that's one really easy way. You can also have like a really low tech way. If you're like, I don't know how to do all that, you could just even have them DM you on Instagram, right? So like, I have this freebie, happy to give it to you, just DM grants to me and I'll send it over. So you can kind of choose what your call to action is. I do think it's good to have that call to action for a good amount of time, like ideally, like a good chunk of episodes, maybe 4 to 6, or if you're like really just recording and batching, like maybe even 12 at a time, if you're starting out, and just having something to give to them is really great. If you are more so like having them book something with you, that's why I said the business model kind of matters, then you might say, you can always book a one-on-one discovery call with me. Here's the link to set that up. And then you have like your Calendly link or something in the description or on DM. So I think it depends on how you're generating leads, but definitely use your podcast for that. And you don't just have to say it at the end, by the way. You can also kind of sprinkle it in the middle, right? So if I was interviewing somebody who was representing like one of those organizations that did the fellowships, I might say, by the way, you can find out about him and the Earthwatch Fellowship in this directory that I have. So make sure you grab that if you haven't already. So that way it's not just at the beginning or end, because some people do fast forward through the intros and the outros, which are just the beginning and end of a podcast. So tip there. And then as far as revenue streams, oh my gosh, there's so many. I know I already mentioned them. I'm trying not to talk too fast. It's something I'm working on. So the ones that people typically think of are ads. So when you hear someone like talking about like, this show is sponsored by whatever, and like you can go get this, here, use my code, here's my link. Those typically take a long time to build up to, right? So I also want to set expectations there that is usually it takes longer, usually harder, and it's not what most travel podcasters do unless you're appealing to a very broad audience. But again, it usually takes a long time to get there. So what I think is the most feasible is to start with whatever your offer is. So if you're starting with a signature course, or you have a membership or a group coaching program, one-on-one clients, I know are often what most people start with because they're getting to know their audience. So I would say whatever your offer is, I would stick to that for like the first 30 or so episodes and do big chunks at a time so you can get enough feedback to then see if that works. But you can do those. You can also do affiliate links. Affiliate marketing has been so good to me. How I usually do that is I either have the link in the description itself, or I will say like, hey, if you're interested, comment blank, or actually, I guess it depends on if it's a podcast, I'll say, DM me for this, or just message me. Sometimes you don't even have to have a word, right? If you have like one core affiliate offering, if they message you and then you can message them back, that's good for your social media too, and also increasing engagement there. So you kind of get to cross-pollinate. So affiliate marketing is great. Ads eventually, maybe. Let's see. Memberships. Yeah, a membership is great, especially if that's your core offering. And I would just talk about your membership all the time because you need way more people, and memberships people can leave. So yeah, I mean, there's so many. And then you mentioned books too, digital products. I love digital products. You could have like a $5 to $7 thing, and then that's almost basically functioning as a freebie where people buy it, but then they still get on your email list, and then you make some money from that too. So podcasts can become paid lead generation. So there's so much you can do.
Yeah, there's so many different things, but I don't want you guys who are listening to feel like, oh, I have to do all of those things, right? So just like Brittany said, figure out what your business model is. Figure out what do you want to do in your business? How do you want to serve people? How do you want to provide value to people? And then I always say choose between like 3 to 5 different revenue streams for your business. You can always grow from there, but start somewhere and start more easy. Start small, like Brittany mentioned. You can have a very low ticket offer as well. Um, or maybe say to yourself, okay, within this certain time frame, I'm only going to focus on lead gen and really push out my freebie as well, and then I can sell on in my email series. So finding a strategy that works for you. What works for everyone doesn't work. What works for you doesn't work for everyone, and what works for everyone else may not work for you. Every business is going to look different, and why and how people use their podcasts are all different. I mean, I've obviously listened to so many different podcasts in the travel industry out there, and I'll go to their website or I'll pitch to them for me to be a guest, and I'll see like they've had like you know tens of thousands or a million downloads, and I'm like, oh my god, that's incredible. How do they do that? But I'm like, I don't need to do that for mine. Like it would be wonderful, but that's not the point of my podcast in my business. And so again, just kind of figuring out why do you want to have a podcast? Don't have a podcast just to have it, because it is a lot of work, and we'll get into that in a second here when it comes to tools and systems and processes and everything. But know why you actually want to have one. Something else that came up while you were talking that I forgot to mention, we were back when we were talking about the benefits of having a podcast, and you mentioned how you didn't always love social media, and I hear that a lot from people like, oh, what do I even post? How do I even show up? Like now we have to do video. Like, what is all this? So when you have a podcast and you're recording it with video, and then of course you can take that, put it onto audio, but you can also use clips of the video as content on social media. Take clips of something that is you're saying or the guest is saying of value to your wider audience and post that and use that. So I love our podcast because it's also a way to create content for us. I can still send my message without having to think about what's my message every day, because it's already, we have so much video content out there to kind of pull clips from. And then lastly is to, I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, so content creation is really great when it comes to the podcast. Shoot, I forgot the other one, but I'll think about it. But what I want to ask you next is a very popular question, because you came into our membership club and you presented on this on podcasting, but mostly like the beginning stages of it, like the creativity mindset of it. And what a lot of people had questions on was, okay, Brittany, I know I want to start a podcast. Tell me more about the tech and the equipment. What do I need? What do I not need? So can you just share from your perspective, like what is your process for setting it up and editing and producing high quality content for your podcast?
Totally. And I also want to give the preface that my process now is not what it was when I first started. So I don't want anyone to hear this and go, oh my goodness, she uses so many tools and apps. I cannot keep all that straight. So when I first started, I used Audacity. Audacity is, and I'll also write all this down. Sorry. So please, I'm like, you have to write them down. But Audacity is a totally free audio program to just hit record. It's very easy. You load it, you hit that red button, it starts recording, you push stop, it stops. So if it's just about getting you to the next stage, I would rather you just use the free tools and get it out there, and then you can get fancy later. So Audacity for Windows, and GarageBand's a good one if you have a Mac. So recording it, as far as equipment like tools and tech, you can use a really inexpensive mic. I had, and I don't even know how you pronounce it because I got it on Amazon. It's Fifine, Fifine. That was like $30 on Amazon. Great. And it even came with a pop filter. The pop filters are those like black round meshy things you see on the mics. So that way you don't get as many plosives. Plosives like the puh and the cuh that make that weird feedback noise. So you can get that on Amazon very cheap. I would get that mic. I now have a Blue Yeti that's about $100 or so. I would recommend if you know that you want to do podcasting from the get-go, you want it to be professional, that would be a good investment. But if you're like short on money, then do $30 one on Amazon. So I would use that. I would record in Audacity, and then I would just export it to a WAV, W-A-V, or MP3 file, and then I would upload it to a podcast host. So that was what I did at the beginning. Now that I do more editing, I use Descript to edit. So if you are interested in like getting all of the words out, because I use like a lot. Hopefully I'll have those edited out for this episode, but I'll leave a couple in so you can hear what it means. But those verbal crutches, it takes out the breaths, those breaths you hear in the mic, all of those weird, awkward pauses. You can use Descript for that, and they make it very easy. It's user friendly. You don't have to be really into tech to that, but I like using that and then being able to granularly get down. And then I also mix and master the audio. So I'll say some words. You can, I'll very briefly explain what they mean. Okay, so normalizing just means if you've ever heard a conversation where someone has their mic and they sound really loud and someone else sounds really quiet. So what I do is I normalize it, which means they sound like they're the same volume. That's really important for interview podcasts. And then I also do what's called compression. And so that just means that if someone had like a really loud, it's hard to explain without showing you what the audio looks like. But if they have like a really loud sound and the rest is kind of quiet and it's just one person, it kind of compresses it all down into the same volume. And it also helps the file to be smaller because you will run out of storage on your computer with all the big files, especially for doing video. So let me just recap. You have a decent mic, you record into a program like Audacity, you export it, you upload it to a podcast host. And we can also talk about hosting in a few seconds, but that could be Spotify for creators, Substack and YouTube. Those are all free ones. There's also Buzzsprout and Captivate are really popular freemium ones where you pay like sometimes $12, $15 a month. So still pretty affordable. And then you make sure you have distribution turned on so that it gets onto all of the other big ones like Spotify podcast, things like that. You set up an Apple account. And that is the gist of it as far as like what the workflow is now. And then I also write show notes, which is like basically a blog post version of the episodes. So what I started, if you just need to start, I would just focus on recording the episodes and figure that part out first because that's like its own project. Like, okay, I got them recorded. Now I'm going to figure out hosting. And it is a good idea if you can when you're starting to have like 10 episodes all at one time anyway, so someone can binge your show because they like to binge. So yeah, that's the gist of it. Was there anything you wanted me to go back to or explain more? Or maybe hopefully I didn't talk over anyone's head with the tag, I can go back and explain something if I need to.
No, we'll be sure to at least put the names of these in the show notes for you so that you aren't like, wait, what is she trying to say? What is how do you spell that? So just to make it easy, we don't want to overwhelm everyone with too many platforms today, just because there are so many options out there. And I know you're great at juggling so many because you love like anything digital, online, websites, tools, tasks. Like, I don't know how you do it because I'm just so more old school. That's why I love having you as my podcast manager. So I'm like, I do the easy part and I just send it on over to you. Um, but that's all great. I did remember what I was going to mention though is another benefit of having a podcast as a coach is that you can also interview your clients. And that's a great way to get testimonials too. So video, audio testimonials, or vice versa, get testimonials, video testimonials and audio and include them into as a clip in your the other recordings that you do. So there's so many different ways to play around with what you do and use your podcast with and how you use it and why you use it. So I hope that you guys got some good ideas from today's session or interview here. So as we wrap up towards the end here, Brittany, where can our listeners connect with you if they need help with launching or managing their own podcast?
Yeah, so because I know you're a podcast listener already, you can definitely check out the Travel Pro audio show that has those first few episodes where I break these down into smaller bits. I will say it's so interesting, even though I do podcast and like blog stuff all day, doing it myself on other people's shows, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, did I say that out clearly? I think everybody does that. But if you go to my solo episodes, you will hear me break each one down individually. Like this is how you pick a podcast host. This is how you pick a mic. So that is a really good place to start if you're going to DIY it. And then I also have like a guide for podcast guesting. Like I have all kinds of stuff there on my website, hellotravelpro.com. And I also have an Instagram account specifically for this stuff. It's not my primary place I show up, but if you want to DM me, that's a good place for that at Hello Travel Pro as well. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. Oh, I also have my Travel Pro Collab Lab. It's a Facebook group, but it's there for you to all find and swap with each other. So if you want to get on each other's shows, great resource for that, especially when you're in the beginning and you're just getting into PR media placements, which Sahara is a master at, by the way. If you haven't come back and listened to all the episodes on this show, you should, because she talks a lot about how she's been able to do that. I feel like she's masterful at that. So yeah, but that's a good place to start, the Travel Pro Collab Lab, and I'll be sure to have all those links in the description for you because I'm the one putting them in.
Wonderful. So I always love to end our episodes on what's a fun fact about yourself that you can share with our listeners, and it doesn't have to be business or travel related.
Well, my fun fact, I already kind of mentioned it, but I'm a classically trained singer. So before I did travel stuff and recreation and tourism, that's what I did, right? Did recording artist work and all that. So in my early 20s, I would do seasonal jobs, and part of that was like music gigs, which is kind of like weird to say. So that was really fun. And because of that, I also learned other languages. So I can speak Italian because of that. I learned Spanish because of that. I usually don't like to speak them unless like I absolutely have to, because I do get a little self-conscious about it. But yeah, that was kind of a fun way to learn Italian, was like full immersion. And I got to meet so many friends who are also musicians. And I'm still very active. Like for my church, I sing there. And when I get together with friends who also play instruments, we do that together. But yeah, it's a fun little piece of my life.
Oh my gosh, I'm jealous. I wish that I've always said like I wish that I can sing and or I wish I can like play guitar or piano or do something musically just because I'm just fascinated. I've had friends growing up who are singers and play guitar and piano, and I would make them sing and play for me all the time. And I'm so jealous. Like it's just not a skill that I have. I'm gonna have to look up. You're gonna have to send me some video or something of you singing because I have not heard you sing yet. And I'm sure your voice is just beautiful. Well, Brittany, thank you so much for joining us on the Travel Coach Network podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Everyone, be sure to follow us on Instagram at the Travel Coach Network. Learn more at thetravelcoachnetwork.com. Come give us a hello in our TCN Global community on Facebook. You can find the link for that and your free beginner's guide to travel coaching in our show notes, along with all of the links and information from Brittany. If you know anyone who may be interested in travel coaching, please be sure to send them our way to our podcast. We would truly appreciate that. And until next time, my fellow wanderers, bye for now.